Rebecca Stone wiped her hands on her lab coat as she watched the small Velcani hatchling try to climb out of its enclosure. The tiny creature had bright purple scales and eyes that seemed far too intelligent for something barely 3 days old. Around the nursery, dozens of other alien young played, slept, or explored their carefully controlled environments. The research station Harmony Base was home to families from 12 different species, all working together to study the strange gas giant spinning below them. Each species had brought their young, creating what Rebecca liked to call the most diverse daycare center in the galaxy. As the head xenobiologist, she spent most of her time here, learning how different species raised their children. A soft chime echoed through the nursery, followed by Commander David Mills's voice over the intercom. "Dr. Stone, please report to the command center immediately. All department heads to command center." Rebecca looked at her assistant Paul, who was feeding crystalline fragments to a young Nexari. The creature absorbed the minerals through its translucent skin, humming contentedly. "Keep an eye on everyone. I'll be back soon." The walk to the command center took her through the main corridor, where she could see alien families going about their daily routines. A group of insectoid Chirathi clicked and buzzed as they discussed their research data. 2 Velcani adults basked under heat lamps while reading reports on their tablets. Everything seemed perfectly normal. The command center buzzed with activity when Rebecca arrived. All the human department heads were there, along with representatives from each alien species. Commander Mills stood at the central display, his face grim. "We've received an urgent transmission from Earth's Deep Space Observatory," Mills began. "A massive solar flare is heading directly for our system. The estimated time of arrival is 6 hours. The holographic display showed a visualization of the approaching flare. Rebecca had seen solar flares before, but this one was different. The energy readings were off the charts, a wall of radiation and electromagnetic fury that would strip away the station's shields like paper. Dr. Kess, the Velcani representative, raised her scaled hand. "What is the severity level?" "Class X9, Mills replied. "Our shields can handle up to Class X3. This flare will overwhelm our defenses completely." A collective murmur ran through the room. Rebecca felt her stomach drop. She had studied enough stellar phenomena to know what this meant. Any station caught in a Class X9 flare would be torn apart. "Evacuation protocols are now in effect," Mills continued. "All personnel have 4 hours to prepare for departure. The transport ships will take us to the emergency station at Proxima Point." The alien representatives immediately began discussing evacuation procedures in their own languages. Rebecca noticed something odd about their conversations. The Velcani were talking about cargo manifests and research data. The Chirathi were discussing which equipment to prioritize. None of them mentioned their young. "Commander," Rebecca said, raising her hand, "what about the children in the nursery?" The room fell silent. Mills looked uncomfortable. "The evacuation ships have limited capacity. We can take all personnel, but cargo space is restricted." "The children aren't cargo," Rebecca said firmly. Dr. Kess clicked her tongue in what Rebecca had learned was the Velcani equivalent of a dismissive gesture. "The young are not priority. Survival of adult specimens ensures species continuation." Rebecca stared at her. "You're talking about abandoning your own children." "Not abandoning," corrected Dr. Voss, the Chirathi representative. His mandibles clicked as he spoke. "Natural selection. Strong survive, weak do not. This is how species endure." One by one, the other alien representatives nodded in agreement. The crystalline Nexari representative pulsed with dull light. "Emotional attachment to offspring is evolutionary inefficiency. Adults carry genetic diversity. Young can be replaced." Rebecca looked around the room in growing horror. These weren't monsters or evil beings. They were intelligent, caring individuals who had worked alongside humans for months. But when survival was threatened, their evolutionary programming took over. Every alien species represented here had evolved from creatures that abandoned their young during crises. "The transport preparation will begin immediately," Mills announced. "All personnel report to your quarters and pack only essential items." As the meeting broke up, Rebecca grabbed Mills's arm. "David, we can't leave those children." Mills looked tired. "Rebecca, I understand your feelings, but we have to be realistic. The alien parents are making their choice according to their nature. We can't force them to save their young. Then we save them ourselves. That's impossible. The evacuation ships can carry either the human crew or the alien young, not both." The life support systems can't handle the extra load, and the weight restrictions are absolute. Rebecca watched through the command center's windows as the first alien families began loading onto the transport ships. Parents carried research equipment and personal belongings, but no children. In the nursery below, 47 young aliens played and slept, unaware that their parents were preparing to leave them behind. "How long until the flare hits after the last ship leaves?" Rebecca asked. "About 90 minutes, Mills replied. Rebecca made her decision. "Then we have 90 minutes to figure out how to keep those children alive." "Rebecca, listen to yourself. You're talking about suicide. Those ships are our only way off this station." "Maybe." Rebecca turned to face Mills directly. "But I'm not leaving those kids to die alone. Call the crew together. Let them decide for themselves." Mills studied her face for a long moment. "You're serious about this?" "Completely." Within an hour, all 23 human crew members had gathered in the main conference room. Rebecca had explained the situation clearly. The alien young would be abandoned. The evacuation ships could save either the humans or the children, but not both. Staying meant certain death when the solar flare hit. The debate was intense. Engineer Kim argued that they had families back on Earth who were counting on them. Security Chief Nash pointed out that they had a duty to their own species first. Dr. Martinez reminded everyone that they were scientists, not soldiers, but others spoke up for the children. Lisa Chen, who worked in maintenance, had spent hours in the nursery and knew many of the young aliens personally. "They trust us," she said. "When their own parents scared them, they came to us for comfort." Engineer Paul Kim, Rebecca's assistant, had done quick calculations. "We could modify the life support systems to keep the nursery sectors running longer. Maybe long enough for a rescue ship to arrive." "Maybe isn't good enough," Nash argued. "We're talking about gambling our lives on a long shot." Commander Mills had remained silent through most of the discussion. Finally, he stood up. "I've been thinking about why humans are different from every other species we've met. It's not our technology or our intelligence. It's this." He gestured around the room. "We're sitting here debating whether to die for alien children who aren't even our own species. That's what makes us human." The vote was close. 12 crew members voted to stay. 11 voted to evacuate. Mills cast the deciding vote. "We stay," he said quietly. "We protect those kids, whatever it costs." Through the windows, they could see the last alien transport ship disappearing into hyperspace. In 5 hours, the solar flare would arrive. In the nursery below, 47 alien children played on, unaware that 23 humans had just chosen to die for them. Rebecca felt a mixture of terror and pride as she watched the ship vanish. They had just made the most human decision possible. The silence in the conference room felt heavy after the last transport ship disappeared from view. 23 humans now faced the reality of their decision. In less than 5 hours, a solar flare would tear through their station, and they had chosen to stay with 47 alien children whose own parents had abandoned them. Engineer Paul Kim broke the silence first. "We need to get to work immediately. The nursery sectors need complete isolation from the rest of the station." He pulled up holographic schematics on the main display. "I can reroute all available power to life support, but we'll have to shut down everything else." Rebecca studied the technical readouts. Each alien species needed different environmental conditions to survive. The Velcani young required temperatures above 35 degrees Celsius. The Chirathi larvae needed specific atmospheric pressure and humidity levels. The crystalline Nexari absorbed energy through harmonic vibrations that had to be precisely calibrated. "It's like trying to run 12 different ecosystems on emergency power," Paul continued. "Under normal circumstances, the station's main reactor could handle it easily. But we'll be running on backup fusion cells while the primary systems are being bombarded by radiation." Dr. Martinez, the station's medical officer, reviewed the biological data. "The young ones are more vulnerable than adults. Their metabolisms are faster, their immune systems less developed. If we get the environmental controls wrong, even by small amounts, they could die within hours." Security Chief Nash had been quiet since the vote. Now he spoke up. "My job is to protect this crew. I have to ask, are we sure there's no other way? Could we take some of the children with us and come back for the others?" Rebecca shook her head. "The transport ships are already overcrowded with the alien adults. Even one extra passenger would overload their life support systems. And the young ones need specialized equipment that we can't move." Lisa Chen, who had spent more time in the nursery than anyone except Rebecca, pulled up images of the alien children on her tablet. "Look at them," she said, showing pictures of young aliens playing together. "The little Velkhani called Scar has been learning to communicate with gestures. The Chirathi larvae recognize my voice and calm down when I sing to them. These aren't just animals, they're people." Commander Mills walked to the large window that looked out over the gas giant below. The planet's swirling storms created beautiful patterns of orange and purple clouds. In all our exploration of space, we've met dozens of intelligent species. But none of them would do what we're about to do. None of them would sacrifice themselves for another species young. "Maybe that makes us stupid," Nash muttered. "Or maybe it makes us human," Mills replied. Paul Kim had been working on his calculations while the others talked. "I've run the numbers 3 times. We can create safe zones in the nursery sectors that should survive the initial impact of the solar flare. The biggest challenge is the electromagnetic pulse. It will knock out most of our electronic systems." "What about manual controls?" Rebecca asked. "We'll have to monitor everything by hand. Temperature, atmosphere, pressure, the harmonic generators for the Nexari. Everything. And we'll be doing it while the station is being torn apart around us." Dr. Martinez looked at the medical supplies inventory. "We have enough radiation medication for maybe 6 hours of exposure. After that..." He didn't finish the sentence. The crew spent the next hour dividing responsibilities. Paul Kim would lead the technical team to modify the station's systems. Dr. Martinez would prepare medical supplies and set up a treatment area. Lisa Chen and 3 others would prepare the nursery for the incoming storm. Rebecca would coordinate the care teams for each species. As they worked, Rebecca found herself thinking about the alien parents who had left just hours before. Dr. Kess had worked beside her for months, studying how different species cared for their young. They had shared meals, discussed research findings, even laughed together at the antics of the nursery children. But when survival was threatened, millions of years of evolution had overridden any emotional bonds. The first major challenge came when they tried to move all 47 alien young into the most protected sections of the nursery. The little Velkhani called Scar seemed to sense something was wrong. He kept looking toward the docking bay where his parents' ship had been. When Rebecca tried to pick him up, he made a soft keening sound that broke her heart. "They know something's happening," Lisa Chen observed. She was trying to calm a group of Chirathi larvae who had become agitated. "The older ones understand their parents are gone. The young Nexari were the most difficult to manage. As crystalline beings, they communicated through harmonic frequencies that resonated through the station structure. Their distress calls created a low humming that made the metal walls vibrate. Paul Kim had to modify the harmonic generators to produce calming frequencies instead. 3 hours before the solar flare's arrival, they faced their first crisis. The atmospheric processor for the Chirathi section began malfunctioning. The larvae needed a specific mixture of gases to breathe, and the backup systems couldn't maintain the proper balance. "I can fix it," Paul said, "but someone needs to manually regulate the gas mixture while I replace the damaged components. It's a 2-person job and we can't spare 2 people." Rebecca looked at the Chirathi larvae, who were already showing signs of respiratory distress. Their normally bright green coloring was turning pale. "I'll do it." "Rebecca, you're needed to coordinate the other species. If something goes wrong with the Velkhani or Nexari, then we'll handle multiple crises at once," Rebecca interrupted. "That's what we signed up for." While Paul worked on the atmospheric processor, Rebecca manually adjusted gas valves according to his shouted instructions. The work was exhausting, requiring constant attention to pressure readings and chemical compositions. One mistake could poison the larvae or suffocate them. During the repair, little Scar appeared at Rebecca's elbow. The young Velkhani had somehow escaped his enclosure and climbed down to the maintenance level. He watched her work with those intelligent purple eyes, occasionally making soft chirping sounds. "You shouldn't be here," Rebecca told him, not pausing in her work. "It's dangerous." Scar tilted his head and made a series of clicks and whistles. Rebecca had been studying Velkhani communication patterns, and she thought she understood. He was asking if she was helping the other children. "Yes," she said simply. "We're helping everyone." The young Velkhani nodded once, then sat down next to her and began making a low humming sound. Rebecca realized he was trying to keep her company while she worked. Even at his young age, he understood that she was taking care of his friends. 2 hours later, Paul finally got the atmospheric processor working again. The Chirathi larvae's coloring returned to normal as they breathed the proper gas mixture. But the effort had cost them precious time and energy. Rebecca's radiation detector was already showing elevated levels, and the real bombardment hadn't even started yet. Commander Mills called everyone together for a final briefing. The flare will hit in 90 minutes. All non-essential systems are offline. Emergency power is routed to the nursery sectors. We have manual controls ready for when the electronics fail. He looked around at his crew. Some looked scared, others determined. All of them looked tired. I want everyone to understand what we're about to face. The electromagnetic pulse will knock out most of our equipment. The radiation will be lethal within hours. The station's structure might not hold together. Any regrets? Nash asked quietly. Mills thought for a moment. Just one. I wish we had more time to do this properly. Rebecca felt a small hand tug at her sleeve. She looked down to see Scar offering her a small crystal he had found somewhere. It was worthless in practical terms, but the gesture made her smile. Around the nursery, other crew members were having similar moments with the alien children they were protecting. Positions, everyone, Mills announced. The storm is coming. Through the reinforced windows, they could see the first effects of the approaching solar flare. The gas giant below began to glow with aurora lights as charged particles hit its upper atmosphere. The stars seemed to flicker as the electromagnetic front reached their position. Rebecca took her position at the manual controls for the Velcani section. Paul Kim was at the main environmental station. Lisa Chen had taken responsibility for the Chirathi. Each crew member had been assigned specific children to protect. The station's AI made its final announcement before the electronics failed. Solar flare impact in 60 seconds. All personnel take cover immediately. Rebecca looked around at the alien children under her care. In a few moments, their lives would depend entirely on the determination of 23 humans who had chosen to stay behind. She thought about the alien parents who had followed their evolutionary programming and abandoned their young. Then she thought about humanity's strange tendency to protect anyone who needed protection, regardless of species. Here we go, she whispered to Scar, who was still sitting beside her. Time to find out what humans are really made of. The first sign of the approaching solar flare was the lights. Every bulb on the station flickered as the electromagnetic front swept past them like an invisible tide. Rebecca felt the hair on her arm stand up as static electricity built in the air. Around the nursery, the alien children sensed something was wrong and began making distressed sounds. Electromagnetic pulse in 30 seconds, Paul Kim announced from his position at the environmental controls. His voice was steady, but Rebecca could see sweat beading on his forehead. Everyone ready? Rebecca checked her manual controls one last time. She had spent the last hour memorizing the temperature and humidity settings for the Velcani section. When the computers failed, she would have to maintain perfect environmental conditions using only analog gauges and her own knowledge. A few degrees too hot or too cold could kill the young aliens in her care. The pulse hit like an invisible hammer. Every electronic device in the nursery went dark simultaneously. Emergency lighting kicked in for a few seconds, then died as the backup batteries overloaded. The only illumination came from the harmonic crystals that powered the Nexari section, casting eerie blue shadows across the room. Report, Commander Mills called out in the darkness. Velcani section stable, Rebecca replied, reading her analog thermometer by crystal light. The temperature was holding at 36 degrees Celsius, just right for the 5 young Velcani in her care. She could hear them moving around in their enclosure, confused but not panicked. Chirathi section functional, Lisa Chen announced. She had 3 larvae to care for, each requiring precise atmospheric conditions. Her section was equipped with old-fashioned pressure gauges that didn't rely on electronics. One by one, the crew reported in. The manual systems were working, but barely. Paul Kim had managed to keep the main life support running, using mechanical valves and pumps that predated electronic controls. It was like trying to operate a modern spaceship with technology from centuries past. The real challenge began when the station started shaking. The solar flare carried more than just electromagnetic energy. It included a stream of charged particles that struck the station's hull like cosmic hail. Each impact sent vibrations through the metal structure, making the whole facility groan and creak. Hull breach in Section 7, Security Chief Nash reported. Section 7 was adjacent to the nursery, close enough that they could hear the whistle of escaping atmosphere through the walls and ceiling. It now, replied Dr. Martinez. He had positioned himself near the emergency bulkheads and was manually closing blast doors to isolate the damaged areas. Rebecca tried to focus on her gauges, but it was hard to concentrate with the station falling apart around them. The young Velcani in her section had gone silent, pressing themselves against the warmest spots in their enclosure. She could see their bright purple eyes reflecting the crystal light, watching her every move. Temperature drop in Velcani section, she called out. The thermometer was falling toward 34 degrees. Without the main heating system, she had to rely on emergency thermal units that burned chemical fuel. She activated another heater and watched the temperature stabilize. A new sound joined the chaos, a low humming that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Rebecca recognized it as the distress call of the young Nexari. The crystalline beings were sensitive to vibrations, and the station's structural damage was affecting their harmonic environment. Paul, the Nexari need stable frequencies, she called across the dark room. Working on it, he replied. She could hear him manually adjusting the mechanical harmonic generators that produced the sound waves the young Nexari needed to survive. It was delicate work that normally required computer precision, but Paul was doing it by ear, listening to the subtle changes in pitch and resonance. The next crisis came without warning. A section of ceiling collapsed in the Chirathi area, missing Lisa Chen by inches. Chunks of metal and insulation rained down around the larvae enclosures. Lisa threw herself over the nearest larva to protect it from the debris. "Lisa, are you hurt?" Rebecca called out. "I'm fine, but the atmospheric controls are damaged," Lisa replied, coughing from the dust in the air. "I'm losing pressure containment." Rebecca looked at her own controls. The Velcani section was stable for the moment, but she could see Lisa struggling with her damaged equipment in the dim light. The Chirathi larvae needed precisely controlled atmosphere to breathe. Without it, they would suffocate within minutes. Making a quick decision, Rebecca activated the backup thermal units in the Velcani section and set them to automatic. It would keep the temperature stable for a while without constant monitoring. Then she climbed through the debris to reach Lisa's position. "Tell me what you need," Rebecca said, kneeling beside the damaged atmospheric controls. "The pressure regulator is stuck," Lisa explained, pointing to a mechanical valve that had been jammed by falling debris. "I need to hold this gauge steady while you clear the blockage." Working together in the dim light, they managed to free the stuck valve. The pressure reading stabilized just as the larvae were beginning to show signs of distress. Their green coloring had started to fade, but it returned to normal as the proper atmosphere was restored. "Rebecca," Paul called from across the room, "your Velcani section is overheating." She quickly returned to her station and found the temperature climbing toward 40 degrees. The automatic systems had malfunctioned, and the thermal units were producing too much heat. She manually shut down 2 of the heaters and opened ventilation valves to cool the air. Little Scar appeared at the edge of his enclosure, making soft clicking sounds. Rebecca had learned enough Velcani communication to understand that he was trying to tell her something. He gestured toward one corner of the enclosure where the other young Velcani had gathered. Following his indication, Rebecca discovered that one of the heating units was sparking dangerously. The electromagnetic pulse had damaged its internal components, and it was on the verge of starting a fire. She quickly disconnected the unit and rerouted heating from another source. "Good boy," she told Scar, who seemed pleased to have helped. Even in the crisis, the young alien was observant enough to notice problems and smart enough to alert her. The bombardment continued for another hour. Each impact sent shockwaves through the station, making their careful work more difficult. Rebecca found herself constantly adjusting controls, compensating for equipment failures and structural damage. Her radiation detector was clicking steadily now, warning her that dangerous levels of energy were penetrating the station's shielding. Commander Mills moved between the different sections, helping wherever he could. He had no specific technical skills for this kind of work, but he could read gauges, operate manual valves, and free up the specialists to focus on the most critical tasks. "How are we doing?" he asked Rebecca during a brief lull in the chaos. "We're alive," she replied, wiping sweat from her forehead. "All the children are stable, but the equipment is failing faster than we can fix it. Every time we solve one problem, 2 more appear." Mills nodded grimly. "Paul thinks we have maybe 2 more hours before the main life support systems fail completely." After that, we'll be running on whatever emergency power we can generate manually. Rebecca looked around the nursery at the crew members working desperately to keep their alien charges alive. Lisa Chen was singing softly to the Chirathi larvae to keep them calm. Dr. Martinez was manually pumping atmosphere into the Nexari chamber. Everyone was focused on their responsibilities, ignoring their own safety and the radiation that was slowly killing them. "Any word from the outside?" Rebecca asked. "The communications array was destroyed in the first wave," Mills replied. "We're completely cut off. No one knows we're still here." Another impact shook the station harder than before. This time Rebecca heard the distinctive sound of metal tearing. Somewhere in the station, a major structural element had failed. Emergency alarms would have been screaming if the electrical system still worked. "Major hull breach in the main corridor," Nash reported. "I'm sealing what I can, but we're losing atmosphere fast." The temperature in Rebecca's section began dropping again as the station's damaged hull leaked heat into space. She activated more thermal units, but she was running low on chemical fuel. Soon she would have to choose which areas to keep warm and which to let freeze. Young Scar seemed to sense her worry. He climbed out of his enclosure and approached her control station. For a moment, Rebecca thought he was just seeking comfort. Then she noticed what he was doing. The young Velkhani was using his natural ability to regulate body temperature, positioning himself near the thermal sensors to help stabilize the readings. "You want to help?" Rebecca asked him. Scar nodded, understanding her tone if not her words. Working together, they managed to maintain stable temperatures in the Velkhani section, while Rebecca's instruments showed the rest of the station growing colder. Other crew members were having similar experiences. The alien children they were protecting were beginning to participate in their own rescue, using whatever abilities they possessed to help their human guardians. As the second hour of bombardment began, Rebecca realized something had changed. The impacts were becoming less frequent, and the electromagnetic interference was starting to fade. The worst of the solar flare was passing, but their ordeal was far from over. "Storm Peak is passing," Paul announced, "but life support is failing across the station. We need to consolidate everyone into the most protected areas." Rebecca looked at the 47 alien children scattered across the nursery. Each species needed different environmental conditions, but they were running out of power and equipment to maintain separate systems. Soon they would have to make impossible choices about who could be saved and who would have to be sacrificed, unless they found another way. The third hour brought devastation beyond anything they had prepared for. Rebecca felt the station lurch violently as something massive struck the outer hull. The sound was like thunder rolling through metal corridors, followed by the terrifying whistle of atmosphere rushing into space through new breaches. "Main reactor is offline," Paul Kim announced, his voice tight with strain. "We're down to emergency cells only. Maybe 6 hours of power left." Rebecca watched her temperature gauges plummet as the heating systems failed one by one. The Velkhani young huddled together in their enclosure, their scales turning darker as they tried to conserve body heat. Little Scar had positioned himself between the smaller ones and the cold air that leaked through damaged walls. Across the nursery, the situation was becoming desperate. The Chirathi larvae were showing signs of atmospheric distress again, as their life support struggled with reduced power. The crystalline Nexari had gone silent, their harmonic communications becoming weak and erratic. "We need to consolidate," Commander Mills decided. "Move everyone into the central chamber. It's the most protected area, and we can combine life support systems." The next 30 minutes were chaos. Crew members worked frantically to relocate 47 alien children of different species into a single space. Each group needed different environmental conditions, but they no longer had the power to maintain separate systems. Rebecca helped carry the young Velkhani to the central chamber. They were cold-blooded creatures who needed warmth to survive, but the room was growing colder by the minute. She wrapped them in thermal blankets salvaged from emergency supplies and positioned them near the few remaining heat sources. Dr. Martinez had set up a makeshift medical station in one corner, treating crew members who were suffering from radiation exposure. His face was pale and drawn, and Rebecca noticed his hands shaking as he prepared medications. The radiation was affecting all of them, but they couldn't stop working. The young Nexari presented the biggest challenge. Their crystalline bodies required harmonic frequencies to maintain structural integrity, but the station's damaged framework was producing chaotic vibrations that interfered with their life support. Paul Kim had rigged a manual harmonic generator, but it required constant operation by hand. "I can take a shift on the generator," Lisa Chen volunteered. She had been working non-stop for hours, but she saw Paul's exhaustion and knew he needed rest. "No," said a small voice behind them. Everyone turned to see one of the older alien children, a young Nexari that had learned basic human speech during their time on the station. "We help." The young Nexari had an idea. Instead of relying on the damaged mechanical generators, the crystalline children could create their own harmonic frequencies by working together. It was something they had never tried before, but their survival depended on innovation. Rebecca watched in amazement as the three young Nexari positioned themselves in a triangle and began producing coordinated harmonic tones. Their crystalline bodies resonated with each other, creating stable frequencies that maintained their life processes without external equipment. It was the first time anyone had seen such cooperation between individuals of their species. "They're teaching each other," Rebecca whispered to Mills. "The alien children are adapting faster than anyone expected." The breakthrough inspired other cooperation. The young Velkani began sharing body heat more efficiently, clustering together in ways that maximized warmth conservation. The Kirathi larvae worked together to create small air pockets that maintained better atmospheric conditions, but their improvised solutions couldn't solve everything. Another major hull breach opened near the nursery, and this one couldn't be sealed. Freezing air rushed through the damaged wall and ice began forming on the interior surfaces. "Temperature critical in all sections," Paul reported. "We're losing the battle against the cold." Rebecca made a desperate decision. She began disconnecting heating elements from the non-essential areas of the station and carrying them to the central chamber. The work required her to venture into sections that were exposed to lethal radiation levels, but the children needed warmth more than she needed safety. Security Chief Nash tried to stop her. "Rebecca, you can't go into the damaged sections. The radiation will kill you in minutes. The cold will kill them faster," she replied, pulling on a damaged radiation suit that offered minimal protection. She made 3 trips into the ruined sections of the station, salvaging heating units and thermal regulators. Each trip left her weaker and sicker, but she managed to bring back enough equipment to stabilize the temperature in the central chamber. On her return from the 3rd trip, Rebecca collapsed near the entrance. Dr. Martinez rushed to check her radiation exposure levels and shook his head grimly. "Rebecca, you've absorbed a lethal dose. Without proper medical treatment, how long?" she asked weakly. "Maybe 12 hours, maybe less." Rebecca looked across the chamber at the alien children they were protecting. Little Scar had noticed her distress and was making soft, concerned sounds. The Nexari were maintaining their harmonic frequencies despite the chaos around them. The Kirathi larvae had arranged themselves into protective formations they had learned from watching human behavior. "It's worth it," she said simply. The 4th hour brought a new crisis. The main life support processor that cleaned and recycled their air began failing. Carbon dioxide levels were rising and oxygen was becoming scarce. With 47 alien children and 23 humans crowded into the central chamber, they were consuming air faster than the damaged systems could replenish it. "We need to reduce the number of people breathing," Paul said reluctantly. "Some of us should move to other sections." "No," Mills decided firmly. "We stay together. If we're going to die, we die protecting these children." Lisa Chen had been working with the atmospheric controls, trying to squeeze more efficiency from the failing systems. "Wait," she said suddenly. "The Nexari don't breathe oxygen like we do. They absorb energy directly from their environment, and the Velkani have much slower metabolisms than humans." She was right. By understanding the different biological needs of each species, they could optimize their air usage. The crew spread out the children according to their atmospheric requirements, creating zones that maximized efficiency for each group. But the solution was temporary. The carbon dioxide scrubbers were failing completely, and the oxygen generators couldn't keep up with demand. Rebecca could feel herself getting lightheaded, and she knew the others were experiencing the same symptoms. That's when young Scar surprised everyone. The little Velkani climbed over to a damaged section of wall where air was leaking into space. Instead of avoiding the breach like the others, he positioned himself near it and began making complex gestures. Rebecca realized what he was doing. Scar was using his natural Velkhani ability to sense atmospheric pressure and composition. He was trying to show them something about the airflow patterns in the room. Following his guidance, Paul Kim discovered that by carefully controlling the air leaks, they could create a circulation pattern that improved atmospheric processing. It was counterintuitive, deliberately allowing some air to escape, but it worked. The carbon dioxide levels began dropping as the improved circulation helped the damaged scrubbers function more effectively. The little guy knows more about atmospheric dynamics than our computers, Paul said with admiration. As the 5th hour began, Rebecca knew she was dying. The radiation exposure was taking its toll and she could barely stay conscious. But around her, she could see the results of their impossible effort. 47 alien children were alive and stable. The human crew had worked beyond their limits and some of them wouldn't survive much longer. But they had proved something important. When faced with the choice between survival and sacrifice, humans had chosen sacrifice. Not for their own species, not for allies or friends, but for children of completely different worlds who had been abandoned by their own kind. Commander Mills knelt beside Rebecca as she rested against a wall. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. Rebecca looked across the chamber at little Scar, who was still helping Paul with the atmospheric controls. The young Velkhani caught her eye and made a gesture that she had taught him days earlier, a human thumbs up. "None at all," she whispered. "This is who we are. This is what humans do." Through the damaged hull, she could see the gas giant below, its storm still raging in beautiful patterns of light and color. Somewhere in space, the alien parents who had abandoned their children were safe on their transport ships, following evolutionary programming that had kept their species alive for millions of years. But here in the ruins of Harmony Base, 23 humans had chosen a different path. They had chosen to be more than just another species fighting for survival. They had chosen to be guardians of the innocent, protectors of the helpless, and champions of those who had no one else to stand for them. The solar storm was passing, but their real test was just beginning. They had saved the children so far, but rescue was uncertain, and their own survival grew more doubtful with each passing hour. All they could do was continue their vigil, holding the line between the alien young and the cold darkness of space. And in that vigil, they discovered what it truly meant to be human. The ships appeared without warning on the 3rd day after the solar storm. Rebecca had drifted into unconsciousness hours earlier, her body finally succumbing to radiation poisoning. Around her, the surviving crew members continued their desperate work, manually operating life support systems that had long since exceeded their design limits. Paul Kim was the first to notice the ships through a crack in the damaged hull. At first, he thought his radiation-sick mind was hallucinating. The vessels approaching Harmony Base weren't human ships. They were the same alien transports that had evacuated 3 days earlier. But that was impossible. The alien species had followed their evolutionary programming and abandoned their young. "Why would they return?" "Commander," Paul called weakly to Mills, who was manually pumping atmosphere into the Nixari chamber. "We have visitors." Mills looked through the hull breach and stared in disbelief. Not 1 or 2 ships, but an entire fleet was approaching. He could see the distinctive designs of 12 different alien species, including massive vessels he had never seen before, ships that could only belong to homeworld governments. The lead vessel was unmistakable, a crystalline ship that could only belong to the Nixari High Council. Its geometric surfaces caught and reflected light from the nearby gas giant, creating patterns of rainbow brilliance against the darkness of space. Behind it came ships of the Velkhani Royal Fleet, their hull scales shifting color as they approached. "They came back," Mills whispered, hardly daring to believe it. The alien rescue teams that boarded Harmony Base found a scene that defied their understanding. In the central chamber of the ruined station, 18 human crew members, all suffering from severe radiation exposure, continued to operate primitive life support systems by hand. 47 alien children of 12 different species were not only alive, but thriving under human care. The Velkhani Queen herself led the boarding party. Her golden scales dimmed with what humans would recognize as shame. She had never set foot on a space station personally before, always sending representatives to handle such matters. But this situation was unprecedented in Velkhani history. Queen Senna found Rebecca unconscious but alive, her radiation detector buried deep in the red zone. Beside her, little Scar kept vigil, refusing to move despite the arrival of his own species' rescue team. The young Velkhani had learned human concepts of loyalty that were foreign to his kind. "Explain this," Queen Senna commanded Paul Kim, who was barely conscious but still adjusting atmospheric controls for the Chirathi larvae. Paul looked up at the towering alien monarch with tired eyes. "Explain what?" "We kept the kids alive. That's what you do with kids." The Queen's translator struggled with the simple words. The concept Paul expressed, automatic protection of young regardless of species, had no equivalent in Velkhani language. Their neural pathways were not designed for such thoughts. "You sacrificed your lives for offspring not of your genetic line," the Queen stated, trying to understand. "This behavior has no evolutionary advantage. It ensures the death of your genetic material while preserving ours." Commander Mills, who had been helping Lisa Chen maintain the Chirathi atmospheric systems, overheard the conversation. Despite his weakness, he managed to respond. "That's the point. It's not about genetics or evolution. It's about doing what's right." Dr. Kess, the Velkhani representative who had been on the original evacuation, approached her queen with obvious distress. "Your Majesty, I studied human behavior for months. I never understood this aspect of their psychology. They form protective bonds with any young, regardless of species. It defies all logical survival strategies." Queen Senna examined the makeshift life support systems that had kept her people's children alive. The ingenuity was impressive, but the sacrifice was incomprehensible. "How many humans died to achieve this?" "5, Mills replied. "Dr. Martinez died yesterday from radiation exposure. Security Chief Nash and 3 others died when they went into the most damaged sections to retrieve equipment for the children." The Queen's scales shifted to a deep purple, a color that indicated profound mental disturbance in Velkhani physiology. 5 adult humans died to preserve 7 young Velkhani who could be replaced through normal reproduction cycles. "They couldn't be replaced." Rebecca's weak voice interrupted the conversation. She had regained consciousness and was struggling to sit up. "They're individuals. They have personalities, relationships, potential. You don't replace people." The Chirathi High Counselor, an ancient insectoid whose compound eyes had witnessed centuries of evolution, approached the human-maintained larval chambers. Its mandibles clicked in the patterns that indicated deep thought. "In our species' entire history," the counselor spoke through its translator, "no adult has ever sacrificed itself for unrelated larvae. The genetic programming prevents such behavior. Yet these humans—" It gestured toward Lisa Chen, who was still singing softly to calm the Chirathi young. "They treat our offspring as if they were their own." Similar scenes were occurring throughout the rescue fleet. Alien species that had followed billions of years of evolutionary programming were confronting behaviors that challenged their fundamental understanding of intelligence and morality. The young Nexari that had learned to speak during the crisis approached their species' representatives. "Humans teach us cooperation," it said in its crystalline voice. "They show us how to help others, not just self." The adult Nexari were shocked. Their species had never developed concepts of altruism or sacrifice for others. Individual survival and logical efficiency were the cornerstones of their civilization. But their young, exposed to human behavior patterns, had somehow learned to think beyond these limitations. Queen Senna found herself face to face with little Scar, who had been her own nephew in the complex Velkhani family structure. The young Velkhani looked at her with eyes that held new intelligence, shaped by days of observing human behavior. "Why did you leave us?" Scar asked in perfect Velkhani, his language skills enhanced by his time with humans who had encouraged communication. The Queen had no answer that made sense anymore. "It is our way," she said finally. "The strong survive to create more young. But humans show different way," Scar replied. "They make weak become strong through protection. They create survival through sacrifice." The revelation that was spreading through the alien rescue fleets was unprecedented. For the first time in their evolutionary history, multiple species were questioning their fundamental behavioral programming. The humans had done more than save alien children. They had demonstrated that intelligence could override instinct. That choice could supersede evolution. Dr. Kess approached Rebecca with medical equipment to treat her radiation exposure. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why did your species choose certain death to save our young?" Rebecca looked around the chamber at the alien children who were now being reunited with their parents. Many of the young ones seemed reluctant to leave their human caretakers, having formed bonds that transcended species barriers. "Because they needed us," Rebecca answered. "And because we could help. That's enough reason for humans." The alien species spent hours documenting everything they found on Harmony Base. The makeshift life support systems, the innovative solutions created under desperate conditions, the evidence of cooperation between species that had never occurred in galactic history. But what impressed them most was the behavior of their own young. The alien children had learned new concepts during their time with humans: empathy, cooperation, protection of others, sacrifice for the greater good. These were ideas that their species had never developed naturally. The young Velkhani showed protective behaviors toward weaker children of other species. The Chirathi larvae had learned to share resources rather than compete for them. The Nexari young had developed harmonic communication patterns that included emotional concepts, foreign to their kind. As the rescue fleets prepared to depart, taking the recovered children back to their homeworlds, Queen Senna made an unprecedented decision. "The human survivors will be taken to our best medical facilities," she announced. "They will receive treatment that exceeds anything available to their own species." "Why?" asked one of her advisors. "They are not our responsibility." "Because," the Queen replied, using a new concept her language had never expressed before, "they are heroes. And heroes deserve to be saved." But the real change had already begun in the alien children themselves. They would grow up carrying human values alongside their own species' traits. They would become teachers and leaders who could bridge the gap between evolutionary programming and conscious choice. As Rebecca was carried to the medical bay of the Velkhani ship, she saw little Scar one last time. The young Velkhani had convinced his queen to let him stay near the humans who had saved him. He made the human gesture Rebecca had taught him, a thumbs up, and spoke in careful English. "Thank you for showing us what family means," he said. Rebecca smiled as consciousness faded. They had saved more than 47 young aliens. They had planted seeds of change that would transform galactic civilization for generations to come. 6 months after the solar storm, Rebecca stood in the observation deck of the new Harmony station, watching construction crews put the finishing touches on the revolutionary design. This wasn't just a replacement for the destroyed research facility. It was something entirely new in galactic history. The new station featured integrated nurseries where human and alien children could grow up together, learning from each other's cultures and perspectives. The design had been a collaboration between all 12 species, but the core concept came from the alien, children who had survived the crisis, the generation that newspapers across the galaxy now called the human touched. Rebecca's recovery had been miraculous by human standards, though the advanced alien medical technology made it seem routine. The Velkhani had shared cellular regeneration techniques that repaired radiation damage at the genetic level. The Nexari had used harmonic therapy to restore her neural pathways. The Kirathi had provided atmospheric treatments that healed her respiratory system, but the real miracle was happening throughout the galaxy. The alien species that had witnessed human sacrifice were undergoing what their philosophers called a moral evolution, the first conscious change in behavioral programming in their species' history. A soft chime indicated an incoming message. Rebecca activated the communication display to see a familiar purple-scaled face. Scar had grown considerably in 6 months, but his eyes still held the intelligence and warmth she remembered from their time in the damaged nursery. "Dr. Rebecca," Scar said in fluent English, his pronunciation much improved, "I wanted to show you something." The display switched to show a large facility on the Velkhani homeworld. Rebecca could see hundreds of young aliens of different species playing together, under the supervision of mixed human-alien care teams. It was the first multi-species orphanage in galactic history, designed using principles that Scar had learned during those desperate days on Harmony Base. "We call it the Guardian Center," Scar explained. "Any young who need protection come here, regardless of their species. We have saved over 3,000 children in the past 4 months." Rebecca felt tears in her eyes. The concept of cross-species child protection had been unthinkable before the crisis. Now it was becoming standard practice throughout the civilized galaxy. The Velkhani Council has approved my proposal to establish guardian centers on 50 worlds, Scar continued. The Queen says that protecting the young of all species makes us stronger, not weaker. She learned this from humans. Other changes were equally remarkable. The Chirathi had revolutionized their society by creating communal nurseries where larvae were cared for by the entire community, rather than being left to survive on their own. Their population growth had increased dramatically, and their culture was becoming more cooperative and less competitive. The Nexari had perhaps undergone the most dramatic transformation. Their crystalline society had always been based on pure logic and efficiency, but the human-touched generation had introduced concepts of emotional bonds and protective relationships. Young Nexari now formed harmonic family groups that included adopted members from other species. Commander Mills appeared on the observation deck, walking with the aid of a cane that compensated for nerve damage from his radiation exposure. He had been offered medical retirement, but chose instead to lead the new Harmony Station project. The delegation from Earth will arrive tomorrow, he told Rebecca. They want to understand why our actions have caused such massive changes in alien societies. Rebecca smiled. What will you tell them? The truth. That we didn't set out to change the galaxy. We just couldn't leave kids to die alone. The original crew members who had survived the crisis had become celebrities throughout human space, but they remained modest about their actions. Paul Kim had established an engineering school that taught human-alien technical cooperation. Lisa, Chen had written a book about interspecies child development that was being translated into 47 languages. But perhaps the most significant change was happening among the alien species themselves. The parents who had evacuated during the solar storm were experiencing what their psychologists called evolutionary guilt, a completely new emotion for their species. Many had sought out the human crew members to express gratitude and ask forgiveness. Dr. Kess had been one of the first. The Velkhani scientist had requested a personal meeting with Rebecca, traveling to Earth specifically to apologize for abandoning her nephew and the other children. I studied human behavior for months, Dr. Kess had said, but I never understood its true meaning until I saw the recordings of what you did. You showed us that intelligence means more than survival. It means choosing to be better than our programming. The alien governments had also responded dramatically. The Velkhani had established the Order of Human Valor, their highest honor, and awarded it to all 23 crew members who had stayed behind. The Chirathi had created a new category of citizenship for humans who demonstrated protective behavior toward alien young. The Nexari had composed harmonic tributes that would play for centuries in honor of human sacrifice. But the most profound changes were still developing. The human-touched generation was growing up with a unique perspective that combined the best traits of their own species with human concepts of altruism and protection. They were becoming natural leaders and diplomats, capable of thinking beyond the traditional limitations of their cultures. A group of young aliens had formed the first interspecies friendship society, creating bonds that crossed evolutionary barriers. They studied together, played together, and supported each other in ways their parents' generations had never imagined possible. Rebecca received daily reports from guardian centers across the galaxy. Each facility was saving lives and changing societies, proving that the human example at Harmony Base had not been an isolated incident, but a reproducible approach to civilization. The new Harmony Station would serve as the center for these efforts, housing the Galactic Institute for Protective Studies. Human and alien researchers would work together to understand how species could overcome evolutionary programming through conscious choice and moral development. As Rebecca watched the station's construction, she thought about the night they had voted to stay behind with the abandoned children. At the time, it had seemed like a simple choice between right and wrong. They had no way of knowing that their decision would transform the moral landscape of the galaxy. A new message arrived, this time from Queen Senna herself. The Velkhani monarch appeared on the display, her scales now showing colors that indicated deep respect and admiration. Dr. Stone, the Queen said formally, I write to inform you that the Velkhani people have voted to adopt human child protection principles as part of our fundamental law. No Velkhani young will ever again be abandoned during crisis situations. This change is being implemented across all member worlds of our kingdom. The Queen paused, her scales shifting to softer hues. I also write to thank you personally. My nephew Scar has taught me that family bonds can transcend genetics and species. This is a concept our people never understood before humans showed us its power. Similar adoptions were happening throughout the galaxy. The Chirathi had modified their reproduction cycles to ensure better care for larvae. The Nexari had established harmonic bonds between adults and young that created permanent protective relationships. But perhaps the most remarkable development was the emergence of mixed species adoption. Human families were beginning to adopt alien children who needed homes, while alien families were learning to care for human orphans. The barriers between species were dissolving, as the galaxy learned to think in terms of children who needed protection, rather than genetic lines that needed preservation. Rebecca walked to the central garden of the new station, where a memorial had been erected for the 5 crew members who had died during the crisis. Their names were inscribed in the languages of all 12 species, surrounded by growing plants from their homeworlds. The memorial bore a simple inscription in human English. They stayed because children needed them. They died because love is stronger than fear. As Rebecca read the words, she heard familiar voices behind her. A group of human-touched young aliens had arrived on the station for the opening ceremonies. They ranged in age from adolescent to young adult, but all shared the same quality of cross-species empathy that had been born in the ruins of the original Harmony base. Scar approached Rebecca and stood beside her at the memorial. He had become the unofficial leader of the human-touched generation, using his unique perspective to bridge differences between species and promote understanding. "Dr. Rebecca," he said quietly, "we have been thinking about what happened that day, why humans chose differently than our parents." "And what did you conclude?" Rebecca asked. "That humans see children as individuals with infinite potential, not just genetic material to be preserved or abandoned. You taught us that protecting the young creates strength, not weakness, because it builds bonds that transcend species barriers." Rebecca nodded. "And now you're teaching that to others?" "Yes," Scar replied. "We are creating a new kind of civilization, one based on human principles of protection and care. The galaxy is learning to be more human." As the sun of the Centauri system set behind the gas giant storms, casting rainbow lights across the new station, Rebecca realized that their impossible choice had indeed changed everything. 23 humans had stayed behind to save 47 alien children, and in doing so, they had shown the galaxy what it meant to be truly civilized. The future would bring new challenges and new opportunities for growth, but the foundation had been laid. Children throughout the galaxy would grow up knowing that someone would always be there to protect them, regardless of their species or origin. And in that protection, the galaxy had learned the most human lesson of all: that love, not survival, is the highest form of intelligence.